Hey, you guys, this is Lauren, the cheerful baker. I'm baking today, so I have on my hat and my cute little apron, and no makeup. So let's get started. Today we are going to talk about flour. So, did anybody check the lives from the last few days? Did anybody watch the butter episode? Well, flour is just as important, or maybe more important than butter. And so I know most people are thinking, Lauren, flour, that's kind of boring, but flour makes a huge difference in your baked goods. And I just wanted to share some information with you about flour. Hey, Brescia, about flour and some other ingredients. We'll talk about some other ingredients throughout the week, just because it really does make a difference, the ingredients that you use in your cookie recipes. Like I said the other day, oftentimes I will see pictures that people post on, not pictures, but posts on Facebook. Let me turn this on to do not disturb. Oftentimes I will see people post on Facebook, like in the cookie groups, that they tried a recipe and it didn't turn out and they want help. And I always want to ask a million questions. What kind of flour did you use? What size were the eggs? How warm were the ingredients? How cold were the ingredients? What type of butter? Because all those things make a huge difference. Now, I love science more than anything. And I've baked my whole life with my mom. I did not go to culinary school, but my mom taught me to bake. And when I was on the Food Network Christmas Cookie Challenge, we had to make up our own recipes. And so I really dug in to learn about the science of baking so that I could do that. Once you understand what the ingredients do, you can make your own cookie recipes. You can take your favorite recipe and you can change them around a little bit. So, again, the other day we talked about butter. Today we're going to talk about flour. So, there's different types of flours. Of course, you all know that. Let me tell you the most important thing to know about flour. That way, if you're totally bored of watching me, you will at least get this. It is really important that you measure your flour correctly. When you look at a recipe, and that recipe, most of them should have the gram weight of flour. You want to weigh your flour. So go on out to Walmart and get you a scale. They're about $20, very inexpensive. Weigh your flour. And if you don't believe me, here's something that you can do. Get a scale, weigh your flour. Now, take that flour, and let's say you're supposed to use 2 cups of flour. I don't know what that is in grams. Let's say it's 500 grams. I have no idea because I weigh everything. Scoop out your flour, level it off, and weigh it, and it will weigh more than it would if you actually weighed it, because it compresses the flour when you scoop it out. You never want to do that. You will add more flour to your cookie recipe and your cookies will be dry, and we don't want that, right? Now, if you're like, listen, I'm not going to get a scale, then another way that you can do it that is a little bit more accurate is you can take your measuring cup, and you always want to use a dry measuring cup. There are two different types of measuring cups. One is for wet ingredients, and it will usually have a spout. The other is for dry ingredients. Make sure that you use a measuring cup for dry ingredients, and you want to take a spoon and put your flour very loosely into your cup, your dry ingredient cup, then level off the top with a knife. You will get the most accurate measurement second to weighing your flour. So that is tip number one. It'll make a big difference in your cookie recipe. Now, there are different types of flour that you can use out there. And I've done lots of research on this, and I am by no way an expert. So if anybody has any additional information, put it in the comments because we can all learn from each other. Also, be sure and say hi to me. Tell me what kind of flour you use. I would really be interested in knowing that. So let's dig into the types of flour that you can use in your cookies. The first is we'll just talk about the one that most people use, all-purpose flour. All-purpose flour has a protein percent of between 9 and 12%. So it's a medium protein flour. What that means is it's going to work in most all of your recipes, including um, your cookies. It's tender, but it also will give the structure to your cookie that you want. So I recommend using all-purpose flour. If you see all-purpose flour in your grocery store, you're going to see two different types. One is going to be bleached. The second is unbleached. The difference is bleached flour has been put through a chemical process which pretty much ages the flour. It gives it better results when baking. Your baked goods will be lighter in color. They will be a little bit more tender if you use bleached flour than unbleached flour. But unbleached flour has some nutritional value that bleached flour does not have. I have used both unbleached and bleached flour. And to be honest, with my cookie recipe, I have not seen much of a difference. I've always used bleached. I received unbleached from my sweet neighbor who bought some from a local store and gave me some. And so that is why I use the unbleached. But I use the bleached. It's a little bit cheaper and it always works great. Somebody uses King Arthur flour unbleached. I love King Arthur flour. It is a little bit more expensive. For me personally, I have not seen a difference in my cookies using a higher priced flour versus a more reasonably priced flour. The flour that I use is from Sam's Club, excuse me, or Costco. I just excuse me, hold on. I'm talking too fast. But you can make your own determination about which brand that you like. But I think that unbleached flour works great for cookies, and the price point is just a little bit cheaper. Um, Sometimes if you use unbleached flour, you can have a little bit of a denser texture to your cookie. So if you are finding that to be true in your baked goods, in your cookies in particular, because we're all about cookies here at the Cheerful Baker, then just switch your flour, keep your recipe the same, switch it to bleached flour and see what types of results that you get. The next type of flour that you can use is pastry flour. Pastry flour has a lower percent of protein in it. It has about 9%. So it's a much lighter flour. It works really, really well if you want sort of that melt in your mouth quality to a cookie. I think it works better, honestly, for a cookie that is the main goal of the cookie is not to be the base for icing or decoration, but just to be a cookie. So like a shortbread cookie without icing, pastry flour is great for pastries, French pastries. I don't think it's necessary to use pastry flour for regular sugar cookies because it's more expensive. But again, if you want to investigate how your cookie will be changed, make a recipe and add pastry flour and see what happens. I think that's the fun of science, right? Thinking what might happen and then trying it out yourself. Now, the next type of flour is bread flour, and bread flour has a really high gluten percentage. It's, I think, 12. I have to look at my cheat sheet, 12 to 15%. So I don't think it's a great choice personally for sugar cookies. Um, it's going to result in sometimes a drier cookie, a chewier cookie, a thicker cookie. You really have to be careful when you use bread flour in cookie recipes or in other baked goods because flour, depending on the percent of protein, will actually suck up water. And if all you have in your house is bread flour and you wanna make some cookies, you need to add some liquid or else your cookies are gonna be too dry. I have never done that, but I've done a lot of research. If I was just trying it out, what I would add would be an extra egg white or an extra egg yolk. It would make it a little bit richer, and that would give you some of the liquid back. But I would not use bread flour. I think your cookie's going to be too dense. Next is gluten-free flour. I have a lot of people ask me about making gluten-free cookies. And hold on just a second because my cheat sheet is not working right. So here we go. Gluten-free flour is can be great. I do not make gluten-free cookies because I am a home baker and we eat gluten in our house, and I don't want to contaminate anybody. But I have made gluten-free cookies. Years ago, I was on a health kick and I was trying to get rid of all the gluten in my house. So I experimented a little bit with gluten-free flours. And the one that I personally found was the best was Bob's Red Mill. Let me look at what it's called. 1-to-1 baking flour. I could not believe how delicious the cookies came out. I mean, it was surprising to me using that. So that's the only gluten-free flour I've ever used. I'm not sure if there's a better one out there. Um, but that's just what I find. So Tanya says, thank you for sharing your knowledge and your expertise. You are so welcome. I am by no means an expert, but I have done a lot of trial and error. And it has come to my attention that not everyone knows how to bake. And it was so interesting. I watched, I think it was on 60 Minutes or Dateline or the news or something. This was about a year ago. And someone did a survey and they were asking kids in college if you could have one skill. They just asked some various kids in college, if you could have learn one new skill, what would that be? And do you know what the most common answer was? How to bake a cake. And I thought that was so interesting. And I'm finding from my kids, my youngest is 18, my oldest is 22, and almost 22. He'll be 22 in 2 weeks. Can you believe that? I'm not old enough to have a 22-year-old. But we baked all the time because that's what I enjoy doing. My mom baked with me all the time. Um, so I know, I have all that knowledge, and so do my children. But a lot of their friends do not because we're busy these days, right? Not as many moms stay home. My mom stayed home, so she had the time to do that. Not that you can't make the time if you work, but I worked for a long time. You're tired when you get home. So kids really want to know how to bake. And I thought maybe you all do too. Just some little tips on how to make your cookies better. So we talked about butter the other day. We talked about flour today. Um, I'll tell you just a few other tips that I just know personally about cookies and how to sort of change your recipe, and hopefully that'll help some of you. And like I said, if you have information that would help someone else, put it in the comments. We're all here to help each other. Eggs, it's very important to make sure that you do use the size of egg that your recipe that your recipe says, because the ratio of water in your recipe, and water coming from eggs is important. So if your recipe says use large eggs and you use medium, you're not going to have enough liquid in your recipe. Now, one way that you can change that is by adding a liquid. So you could add pureed fruit, or you could add bourbon. We're in Kentucky. So sometimes I will add bourbon to a recipe. And if I do, I decrease the amount of egg in the recipe because I want the liquid to be the same as the recipe entailed. You also do not ever want to change baking soda and baking powder. If your recipe says baking powder, use baking powder. If your recipe says baking soda, there's a reason that they said that. You want to use baking soda. Many ingredients will react differently with baking soda versus baking powder. I remember when I was first learning to cook years ago, and I don't know if they still say this, but there would be things online that would say, if you're out of this, use this. Don't do that. Just go to the store. So if your recipe calls for baking powder, use baking powder. Now you can play with that and you can see what types of results that you have because they will be different. But if you are just going by a recipe, make sure that you use what the recipe specifically calls for. I use pink Himalayan sea salt in my cookies because I think it's pretty and I just like the way it tastes. You could maybe try that if you want something a little bit different. I just honestly, I think it's pretty. So that's what I use. Vanilla, don't use imitation vanilla ever. Vanilla is one of the highlights in your cookies. It's what gives it the flavor. Use real, honest to goodness vanilla. It will make a big difference. I'm trying to think what else. Let's see. Sugar. I use a blend of brown sugar and white sugar in my cookies because I like the sort of butterscotchy sort of flavor that brown sugar gives to my cookies. I think brown sugar keeps my cookies from spreading. I don't know if that's true, but when I have made sugar cookies with only white sugar, I've had more problems. The recipe that I use that has brown sugar in it, they never spread ever, ever, ever. So, what else goes in cookies? We've talked about the butter, we've talked about creaming the other day, we've talked about eggs, flour, sugar, salt, vanilla. I think that's it. So I hope that this is helpful to you all. Make sure that you teach those teenagers how to bake so that when I'm old, I can go to the bakery and find some good baked goods. And thank you for joining me. Be sure and follow me, The Cheerful Baker. And you can go find, let me put my little banner. If you go to cheerfulbaker.com, I have a blog post out there today, and it's all about flour. I mean, yes, I'm having so much trouble with my phone for some reason. I don't know what's going on. I can't make it go down. I'm trying to look up, but it's the I think it's flower power. I write these blogs at like 5 in the morning, so I don't remember what they're called. But it's out there today on Cheerful Baker. You can find the blog. You can find the one about flour. You can find the one about butter. Let's see. Any other questions? You're welcome for your helpful tips. Baking truly is a science. You really want to go exactly. I don't want to say you want to go exactly by the recipe. Um, Baking is not something I think that you can just wing it unless you are very familiar with what each particular ingredient does. And once you know that information, you can wing it. And if you are a science nerd like me, get a Science of Baking cookbook. Um, the one that I love, I think it's called, let me look it up. The Ultimate Cookie Cookbook, The Ultimate Cookie The Ultimate Cookie Handbook is fantastic. Um, I learned a lot about what I know from there. I learned a lot from my mother, and I learned a lot just from doing research on the internet because this is so fascinating to me. But that's a really great book, The Ultimate Cookie Handbook. It tells you what all of the ingredients do in a recipe. It tells you the basics of baking, and then it has some fantastic, not decorated sugar cookie recipes, but just cookie recipes. And occasionally we have to make a good chocolate chip cookie, right? So thank you all for watching today. Tomorrow, let's see, what am I going to do tomorrow? If you want to know what my schedule is, you can look on my page and I have it. Tomorrow, I'm going to do a spring flower cookie tutorial. So I think that will be a lot of fun. At 1, and these are all at 1 o'clock. On Friday, I'm going to talk about cookie dough. I'm going to give you some tips on how I make my cookie dough, how I store my cookie dough. Hopefully that'll help a few of you. Some time-saving things with cookie dough. And then on Saturday, I'm going to talk about cookie dough and cookie storage, how you can store your cookies. So if you all have any questions about this stuff, please send them to me because I'll make sure that I talk about those during these lives. Next week, I think I'm going to talk about icing next week and do some more tutorials. And then after that, I think the 3rd week, I'm going to talk about baking supplies. And then the 4th week, I'm not sure. I'm kind of a wing it. I decide on Sunday what I'm going to do for the week. You will be able to watch this whole video. It will be saved on my page and on YouTube. So thanks again for watching. You all have a great day. I'm off to bake some cookies. Bye.